All right, let's get right into today's explainer. We're unpacking a wild workplace mystery, often called the remote login from an empty desk. It's honestly an amazing case study of how one totally ordinary, kind of boring administrative record completely unraveled a super polished corporate cover-up. We're going to see exactly how a simple remote login exposed systemic identity misuse and how a team literally used raw data to shield themselves from some pretty toxic office politics. Okay, so to kick things off, listen to this guiding principle from strategy lead Maya Carter. She says, the dangerous documents never look dangerous first. And Maya is exactly the kind of professional who just doesn't look away from the boring details. On this specific morning, company leadership really just wanted a quote-unquote clean day. No drama, right? But then this tiny administrative record pops up. It didn't look like a smoking gun at all. It just looked like a minor system update. But Maya? She knew that people who want to hide expensive things, well, they tend to put them in really boring places. Her attention to this one isolated detail kicked off a chain reaction that absolutely nobody in management saw coming.
So that brings us to part one, the empty desk login. A small record that refused to stay polite.
Picture this, right? It's the middle of the workday, the office is quiet, and an employee is actually away from their desk, out to lunch. Yet somehow, right in the middle of that lunch break, their account mysteriously approves this crucial administrative record. To an untrained eye, sure, it might look like just a server glitch or maybe a delayed sync. But the thing is, it took exactly one quiet, isolated discrepancy to totally contradict leadership's promise of a clean, drama-free day. Just one. This record didn't sound an alarm, it didn't send out an angry email blast, it just waited in the system logs for someone patient enough to actually read it. And that one little number, it became the exact thread that pulled apart the entire official story. Moving into part two, the polite cover-up, or erasing credit with corporate language. Now, what's really interesting here is how management reacted. They immediately tried to brush this anomaly off during an update meeting. They were pushing this literal fresh start agenda, framing the weird remote login as just a, process issue, urging everyone not to reopen old wounds. They were throwing around words like alignment, efficiency, and team outcome. And look, those polished corporate buzzwords, they sound perfectly reasonable, but they were actively being weaponized to hide the raw reality of the situation, which was erasure, missing approvals, identity misuse, and ultimately stolen credit. The old culture was creeping back in, not with some dramatic villain monologue, but wrapped in polite corporate vocabulary. But here's the thing, that polite cover-up totally failed, and it's all thanks to an operations coordinator named Sofia Lane. Sofia dared to ask the exact uncomfortable questions that seasoned corporate players are basically trained to skip over. She looked straight at the properties panel and asked, what changed, who changed it, and who actually gained power when it changed? She absolutely refused to let panic or that forced office politeness dictate the timeline. By zeroing in on these specific questions, Sofia anchored the whole room back to the hard facts, completely stripping away those vague excuses. Which leads us perfectly to part three, mapping the evidence. Because background work always leaves foreground records. Instead of getting dragged into debates about team alignment or chasing human opinions, which, let's face it, are easily manipulated, Maya followed the undeniable systems. People can pivot all day long, but systems leave a trail. So she actually built a proof map right there on the conference room's glass wall. She mapped out the original object, the changed owner, the missing approval, the affected employee, and the calendar export. And this brilliantly illustrates how, by themselves, none of these single data points look super dramatic. But when you put them side by side, that accumulation proved, without a doubt, that erasing the employee's name wasn't some random glitch. It definitely wasn't an accident. It was intentional. And to really lock down this map, executive assistant Nina Ross brought in some absolutely vital context. She pointed out something so profound. People forget that background work still has foreground records. Nina pulled up calendar exports, saved drafts, meeting notes, the whole shebang. You see, people who steal credit often treat background administrative tasks as if they're completely invisible. But Nina proved that this quote-unquote invisible work actually sees everything. Her exports place that one weird, isolated login right into a much larger, totally undeniable pattern. Okay, part four, the undeniable sequence. This is where Jordan brings in the raw export. Let's move to the logs and see how this builds, because IT audit specialist Jordan Price didn't just bring suspicion to the committee, he brought cold, hard sequence. He laid out the raw system logs and in doing so stripped away literally any wiggle room for management's interpretation. Look at this. At exactly 12:00 p.m., the employee physically leaves their desk. Then, at 12:15 p.m., a remote session is initiated. 2 minutes later, at 12:17, a saved token is accessed. And boom, at 12:20 p.m., the record ownership is changed. The system sequence just speaks for itself, doesn't it? The owner field changes, the timestamp moves. It completely collapses the whole harmless glitch story. And guys, here is the twist. Jordan traced that remote session straight back to a saved token. The truth wasn't some cinematic hacker furiously typing away to break through firewalls. No. It was simply someone inside the office accessing a saved authentication token to secretly hop in, change a record, and steal the credit while the actual author was out at lunch. It's cold, it's incredibly precise, and it's entirely undeniable. So once this method was finally exposed, Aisha, an analyst with fresh eyes on the situation, asked the ultimate question: who benefits if this stays classified as harmless? And wow, this was the moment the energy in the room totally shifted. You know, office lies usually survive because the harm is kept really vague and abstract. But Aisha's question forced everyone to finally acknowledge specific, targeted harm. Someone deliberately used a saved token to erase a colleague's name. They just couldn't pretend it was a harmless process error anymore. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Writing the Repair, moving from punishment to systemic protection. Now, obviously, management wanted a private fix, right? They wanted a quiet email, a slightly revised note, maybe a tiny apology behind closed doors. But Maya flatly refused. She insisted that damage done publicly has to be corrected publicly, just to protect future employees. So the team literally wrote new repair steps straight into the company workflow. Preserve, notify, correct, attach, name, and audit. These aren't just empty corporate slogans. They're concrete mandatory actions. From now on, the system has to preserve the record, notify the affected employee, publicly correct the file, attach a reason code, name the actual creator, and leave an auditable trail. Basically, documentation is no longer just optional politeness. It is absolutely mandatory protection. And from a technical standpoint, they instituted a hard, non-negotiable rule. Saved tokens must expire. This is the systemic repair, ensuring that authentication credentials can never be indefinitely reused to, act as false witnesses after a user steps away from their machine. By forcing tokens to expire, they totally removed the very mechanism that allowed this identity misuse to happen in the first place. They didn't just catch a bad actor, they fundamentally changed the architecture to make that kind of theft impossible. So the crucial point here is how this architecture completely transformed the company's culture. Look at the shift. They moved from relying on private fixes to demanding public corrections, from indefinite tokens to expiring tokens, from optional politeness to strictly auditable actions. It's amazing how a workplace fundamentally changes when the powerful people are finally held to the exact same system policies as everyone else. And actually, this new rule was tested almost immediately on a senior leader, which proved right away that the standard wasn't going to be selective. This entire ordeal really leaves us with a profound realization. The truth was not dramatic, it was documented. Systems, logs, and administrative records will outlast literally any corporate lie, any polished PR explanation, and any forced politeness, as long as you're patient enough to actually sit down and read them. Ultimately, credit theft isn't just a career issue, it's a memory issue. It takes a massive emotional toll, and it teaches really good people to constantly doubt if their hard work will ever truly be safe. But a workplace becomes so much safer when names cannot be quietly removed and records cannot be politely ignored. In the end, Sofia got her name restored, not as some special favor, but as a documented, hard fact. Which leaves us with a pretty crucial question to ponder about our own digital accountability. Think about it. In your office, if a record was changed to quietly erase your name, would the system testify for you, or would it testify for the person who took it? Does your company rely on quiet, private fixes or real, auditable actions? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, keep checking those timestamps, and I'll catch you next time as we decode another amazing topic.